The monitor screamed a flat, single tone, and in that sound was the end of everything Petty Officer First Class Marcus Reaper Colton had ever fought to protect. 3 doctors had already stepped back from his bed. Blood soaked through bandage after bandage faster than anyone could replace them. His body, carved by a decade of Black Ops missions and impossible extractions, had finally met something it could not outrun, a bullet lodged too close to the heart, and a fever that had turned his blood into fire. The senior surgeon, a man who had seen war wounds for 22 years, pulled off his gloves and said the words no soldier's family ever wants to hear: there was nothing left to try. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet power of one person refusing to give up on another, hit like, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs hope tonight, and subscribe to Midnight Tales before we go further into Marcus's story. Nurse Elena Vasquez had been on shift for 16 hours straight. She wasn't supposed to be in that room. Trauma cases like this belong to specialists, not to a floor nurse running on cold coffee and aching feet. But something pulled her through that door anyway, maybe instinct, maybe the years she'd spent as an army medic before hanging up her boots for scrubs. She had seen young men die on foreign sand, and she had sworn to herself that she would never again stand still while a life slipped away in front of her. She looked at Marcus's chart. She looked at the military officer standing frozen in the doorway, his face pale with the kind of grief reserved for men who had watched their brothers fall before. And she looked at Marcus himself, a man reduced to wires and silence, a man whose file read like a legend: 11 deployments, dozens lived because of his steady hands and steadier aim, a sniper so precise his own team called him a ghost. But right now, he was just a dying man nobody could reach. The doctors tried to usher her out. Protocol said this wasn't her case. But Elena had learned long ago that protocol doesn't always save lives, people do. She leaned close to his ear, past the tubes and the monitors and the smell of antiseptic and fear, and she did something no medical textbook ever taught her. She whispered his name. Not his rank. Not his call sign. His name, Marcus, soft, human, real, the way someone says a name when they refuse to let it become a memory. She told him about the world waiting for him. She spoke of mornings he hadn't seen yet, of a mother somewhere praying by a phone, of a life beyond the war that had swallowed so many years of his youth. She held his hand, not checking his pulse, not performing a procedure, just holding it the way you hold someone you refuse to let go of. And for a moment that felt like it stretched across the entire hospital, nothing happened. The machine stayed silent. The room stayed still. Then his finger moved. It was small. It was almost nothing. But Elena felt it against her palm, and her breath caught in her throat like she'd been struck. The military officer in the doorway saw it too, and his hand flew to his mouth. The senior doctor, halfway to writing a time of death, turned back around, disbelief written across every line of his face. Marcus's finger curled again, weak but undeniable, pointing faintly toward the sound of her voice as though some buried part of him was fighting its way back through the dark to find her. The room erupted into motion. Doctors who had given up moments earlier were suddenly shouting orders, adjusting lines, calling for equipment they thought they wouldn't need again. Elena didn't move from his side. She kept whispering, kept holding on, because she understood something the machines could never measure, that sometimes the body needs permission from the soul before it agrees to keep fighting, and sometimes that permission comes wrapped in nothing more than a gentle voice reminding a dying man that he is not forgotten, that he is not alone, that somebody out there still needs him to open his eyes. Over the following days, Marcus's vitals stabilized in ways the doctors called miraculous and Elena called stubbornness, his stubbornness, and hers. She visited him during every break, every spare minute, not because it was her job but because some threads, once tied, refused to be cut. When he finally woke, disoriented and weak, the first thing he asked wasn't about his wounds or his team. He asked who had been talking to him in the dark. Who had refused to let him drift away. When Elena walked into that room and he saw her face, something in him recognized her voice before his mind could even place the memory. Tears welled in the eyes of a man who had stared down death in war zones without flinching, because he understood, in that instant, that the person who saved his life wasn't a machine or a scalpel, it was a woman who simply refused to stop believing in him when every chart, every monitor, and every expert in the room had already said goodbye. Marcus's recovery became the quiet talk of the hospital. Nurses whispered about the sniper who wouldn't die, the SEAL who fought back from the edge of nothing. But Elena never took credit. She simply said that everyone deserves someone who refuses to give up on them, especially in the moment they can no longer fight for themselves. She said the body remembers kindness even when the mind cannot, and that sometimes healing doesn't begin with medicine, it begins with being seen, being spoken to, being loved by someone brave enough to stay in the room when everyone else has already left. Months later, Marcus stood on his own 2 feet again, stronger than the doctors believed possible, and the first person he thanked wasn't the surgeon who operated on him. It was the nurse who whispered his name back into his own chest when his heart had almost forgotten how to answer. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that kindness can reach places medicine cannot, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Midnight Tales so you never miss a story like this one. Before you go, tell me in the comments, if you were the one lying in that bed, whose voice would you want to hear pulling you back? Because sometimes, the difference between losing someone and saving them isn't found in a machine or a miracle drug, it's found in a single whispered word, spoken by someone who simply refuses to let go.